I'm Tom, I'm product manager at Thread. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Thread and what we do, we're on a mission to make it easy for guys to dress well. And we do this by bringing together expert stylists and powerful machine learning algorithms to create a highly personalized, recommendations-driven shopping experience. Now, have any of you ever felt like you haven't been getting quite the right balance between speed and quality when you've been building products? Maybe recent features you've been working on, you feel like you've been cutting a few too many corners, and as a result, your code and your UX quality is suffering. Or maybe, on the other hand, you feel like you've been wasting a bit of time polishing up features that end up not having the impact that you'd hoped for in the first place. Well, at Thread, a little while ago, we started to feel like we were having some of these issues. We felt like in trying so hard to achieve both speed and quality, we were ending up actually getting neither. So when we realized we had this issue, we kind of set out to try and find a solution. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to talk about what we've been doing at Thread since then to try and solve this problem and the lessons that we've learned along the way. So the first step for us really was to try and understand the problem in a bit more detail. So we started to look at recent projects we've been working on as a team to see if we could identify any common patterns that were causing some of these issues. So to make it concrete, I'll talk through an example project that we'd been working on at the time where we'd experienced some of these problems. So on my team at the time, we were working on, well, one of our goals was to optimize our registration flow. So for those of you who've signed up to Thread in the past, you'll know our registration is quite long. It feels like quite a lot of effort. It's this sort of multi-page form where we ask you a load of questions about yourself. And we had a hypothesis as a team that we could improve the completion rate of the registration flow if we changed it from this sort of multi-page form and kind of unified it into a single-page sort of progressive form with UX similar to a kind of type form. Now, to test out this hypothesis, it was pretty clear we were going to need to build an A/B test. At the end of the day, we wanted to learn what this change would do to a user behavior metric, to our registration completion metric. So we got into a room to kick off working on building an A/B test to test this out. Now, right from the start of sort of kicking off this project, it became pretty clear that different people on the team were bringing quite differing kind of assumptions around how we should be approaching this project. So on the one hand, there were those of us in the room saying, look, we haven't proven yet if this idea is going to be is actually valuable. We don't know what this is going to do to our metrics. And there's a chance that it does nothing at all to our metrics. So what we should be doing here is we should be cutting scope as far as we can. We should just be trying to sort of hack something together quickly, get something out there, start gathering data, start learning. But on the other hand, there were those of us in the room saying, well, yeah, but what we build here is going to go live into our product. It's going to go into our code base. It's going to go in front of our users. And at the end of the day, if this new registration ends up winning, we're going to want to keep it around in the products for the long term. So maybe we should be thinking about building something for the long term here. We should be thinking about minimizing the tech debt we introduce and delivering a great UX to our users. Now, as you can probably guess, this difference in opinions kind of really manifested itself in what we ended up actually shipping. So we did make some investments in quality on this project. We kind of invested in a new architecture to power the new registration, when in hindsight, we probably could have gotten away with hacking something together with what we already had. But on the other hand, we did cut some corners as well in the interest of moving faster. And what we ended up shipping at the end of the day had this kind of slightly clumsy handoff between the new shiny registration and the legacy experience around it. So what we had done is we had kind of introduced a bit of tech and design debt as part of this. So really, yeah, where we kind of ended up was this kind of unhappy compromise between the two approaches of moving really fast to learn and building something of really high quality. So yeah, we basically what then happened was, as it turned out, the new registration flow wasn't successful in moving our metric. So we all kind of went away from this project just kind of wishing we had moved a bit faster, wishing we had cut more scope to get something out there to learn and to sort of start validating the hypothesis. But I think we would have felt equally bad as well if the project had ended up succeeding as well, because then, in that case, we would have been lumbered with this new feature in the product that had introduced some new tech and design debt in the system, and we were going to have to pay for that at some point in the future. So we're in this kind of lose-lose scenario, essentially. Okay, so that was this project and the problem we were experiencing. So what was driving the problems we experienced on that project? Well, I think at root, what was causing these issues was kind of a lack of clarity between whether we were doing discovery or whether we were doing delivery. So I'll just introduce these terms quickly now for those of you who aren't familiar with them. Well, I'm sure a lot of you are. So at Thread, we think of our product team as having kind of two headline goals. So the first is to build the right product. So we want to make sure what we're building today is going to have a positive impact on our metrics tomorrow. And we want to make sure that what we're building is actually going to solve real problems for our customers. It's going to add sort of real value to our customers' lives. But on the other hand, we want to make sure we're also building the product right. We want to make sure that the code we're shipping today doesn't introduce a load of tech debt that we're going to have to pay for in the future. We want to make sure that we're maintaining a high-quality UX across the whole product experience. Now, as part of working towards these two goals at Thread, we kind of think of the work of our product team as existing in these two distinct phases. The first is discovery, and the second is delivery. So in discovery, what you're doing is you're essentially trying to move as fast as you can to uncover the right product. So most of our initial assumptions around what we should be building will usually turn out to be wrong. So in discovery, what you're doing is you're taking your ideas and you're trying to validate them really fast. So you're testing out, you're user testing prototypes, you're talking to your users, you're assessing the feasibility of what you want to build. And it's only once you've kind of sufficiently validated your ideas that you then move them into your discovery backlog to build. And at this point, you can say, OK, we're pretty confident now we're on the right track. So let's now invest in building the product right. So this distinction between discovery and delivery is really helpful, but there can be occasions where it starts to get a bit fuzzy between whether you're doing discovery or delivery. So to illustrate what I mean, let's think about this registration project. Was this discovery or was it delivery? Well, on the one hand, what we were doing here was we were building an A/B test, and we were doing that because we wanted to learn. We wanted to see what this change would do to our metric, and that was all part of discovering the right product. So that would make it discovery, right? Well, on the other hand, what we were building here was going to go live into our product, into our code base, in front of our users, and there was a chance it was going to stick around in our product for the long term. So maybe we'd be better off thinking of it as delivery, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure we're building the product right as well. And it was precisely this sort of lack of clarity that was causing us those problems on this project, because those of us on the team who were bringing a discovery mindset to the project were pushing for less scope, just hacking something together, start learning fast. Whereas those of us bringing more of a delivery mindset were pushing in kind of exactly the opposite direction. Now, when we started to think about it at Thread, we realized that we were having this same kind of problem whenever we were working on a project where we wanted to build something in order to learn. So whenever we were building an A/B test or maybe shipping a first version of a feature to start measuring usage metrics, whenever we were building something in order to learn, we had this kind of lack of clarity between discovery and delivery. And what that then led to was this kind of unhappy compromise between speed and quality, where we were getting neither. OK, cool. So that's the problem. So I'll now talk a bit about what we've been doing since then to try and solve this problem. So really, once we understood the problem in this level of detail, the first step to trying to solve it became pretty clear. We simply needed to stop trying to do discovery and delivery at the same time. It's just simply not possible to do those two things at the same time. So the first thing we started to do is we started to get really clear at Thread about dividing our build projects up into two distinct types. So the first is test, and the second is delivery. So whenever we build something at Thread, we're clear right from the outset whether it's a test project or whether it's a delivery project. So test projects, as I'm sure you can guess, they're sort of firmly part of discovery. And the reason why we don't call them discovery projects is that it's just important to bear in mind that discovery can involve a whole load of different things that don't always involve you actually building something. So testing prototypes is a good example. But at Thread, whenever we're building something in order to learn, we call that a test project. So in test projects, what you're doing is you're basically starting with a hypothesis that you want to validate. And you're saying, OK, let's work backwards from that hypothesis and work out what is the minimal thing we need to build to validate this hypothesis. So what's the minimum scope of the A/B test or whatever it is that we need to build to validate. then delivery projects are completely different. So once you get to delivery, you've kind of done all that discovery work up front to get confident in your idea. You might have run some tests as part of that. And you're now saying, okay, we're confident we're on the right path. Let's invest in building the product right. Cool. So I'll talk in a bit more detail sort of how we apply these at Thread. But first of all, I thought I'd just talk through a recent project we've been working on where I think we've really benefited from taking this sort of clear test and delivery framing. So recently at Thread, I've been working on a team trying to improve the activation of new users coming to Thread. And as part of that, one thing we wanted to do is we wanted to try to improve the navigation of our website. So this is what it used to look like. As you can see, it's pretty overwhelming. It's quite complex. There's sort of loads of tabs here that have built up over time as we've iterated the products, added new features. So we had a hypothesis as a team that we could improve the activation of new users on Thread if we sort of radically simplify the navigation and reduced it down just to the core, sort of most important 3 tabs for the user. And we thought this would improve activation because, as a new user on Thread, it would just make it so much easier to kind of wrap your head around the product, what it is, how to use it, and how to get value from it. Now, to test this hypothesis, it was pretty clear we need to build an A/B test. So we could obviously get some sort of initial learnings from testing early prototypes. But ultimately, what we wanted to do is we wanted to learn what this change would do to a user behavior metric, to an activation metric. So we're going to need to build an A/B test. Now, right from the start of working on this project, we were confronted with some quite difficult questions. So when we started looking into the legacy navigation that we were going to test a new version of, we started to realize it had some tech debt associated with it, and in fact, this tech debt had been slowing us down a bit, actually, in the past. So we kind of wanted to deal with that tech debt at some point. And there was also a bit of design debt, so the navigation wasn't consistent, actually, visually or functionally across the whole product experience. So we wanted to tidy that up as well. So the question was, what should we do about this, basically? Should we, as part of building this A/B test, should we spend some time investing in paying down some of this debt, or should we sort of ignore it for now? Well, usually in the past at Thread, when we'd be confronted with these kind of questions, we'd end up in a kind of strange middle ground where we'd spend some time investing in the tech and design debt, but we wouldn't solve those issues completely. And in the meantime, we'd just be moving slower to actually testing out the hypothesis that we wanted to test in the first place. However, on this project, we're able to kind of sidestep these issues by taking a clear sort of test and delivery framing. So what we did, as soon as we got into a room to start working on this A/B test, we agreed as a team whether this was a test project or a delivery project. And it's pretty clear it's a test project, right? We've got a hypothesis here that we want to validate. We're building something to gather data to sort of discover the right product. So that makes this a test project. And as soon as we agreed on this, the way forward started to become really clear. We'd simply ignore the debt issues for now, and we'd just build off the existing navigation. And the reason we do that is that that's just quite simply the simplest, easiest, and fastest way to get something built out there to start learning. So this is then what we ended up building. You can see it's not the most beautiful thing we've ever created on Thread, and it still had these debt issues associated with it. But by taking this faster approach, it meant that we were able to get this designed and built within a couple of days of kicking off the project. So it just meant that we were up and running and testing really fast and validating our hypothesis. Now, as it turned out, this new navigation was a winner, so it was successful in activating more new users on Thread. So it was only at that point that we then moved into a delivery mindset. So we kicked off a new project, which was a delivery project, where we said, okay, from this test, we're kind of pretty sure we're on the right track here, and we should be simplifying the navigation in this way. But now let's take on a delivery project to invest in building a great, really high-quality version of this navigation. So this then is what we ended up building and shipping at the end of the day. And this feature is just much more aligned with our sort of aspirations towards quality as a team. And also, as part of this delivery project, we were able to deal with those tech and design debt issues once and for all and kind of completely get rid of them. Okay, so that's a much better outcome, I hope you'll agree, than the registration project that I talked about at the start. And I think really key to driving the outcome of this project was that everyone on the team was just really aligned with the exact goals at every point in the process. From the initial test project, where the goal was just to learn as fast as we could, through to the subsequent delivery project, where our goal was to build a navigation of really high quality using those learnings. But I think there was also something a little bit more subtle going on here that drove the success of this project. So I think it was really key that when we were designing and building the test version of the navigation, everyone on the team really trusted that if this test ended up winning, we would then come back and spend the additional time to build a higher quality, more polished version of the navigation. We would spend more time on a delivery project afterwards. Because if we didn't have this trust as a team, then when we're working on designing and building the test navigation, we'd always be kind of tempted to sneak more and more scope and more polish into that test. And then we'd just be moving slower to actually validating our hypothesis. So this trust that we had as a team was really key to moving fast in this project. So where did that trust come from? Well, this then brings me to a really key part of how we've been using test and delivery at Threads, which I've kind of intentionally glossed over a little bit up to this point. So the key point is that tests are purely temporary. So as soon as you've learned what you needed to learn from your test, you've gathered your A/B test results or what have you, you then immediately remove the test from your product. And at Thread, we often go so far, actually, as to delete the code as well. Now, this might sound a bit extreme, but symbolically, it's really important. Because if everyone on your team really trusts that the tests you're building are only going to be in your product for a limited space of time, and any tech and design that you might introduce as part of that will be removed after this limited space of time, then it's so much easier to have those conversations about really cutting your scope and sort of reining in your perfectionism in order to move faster on your tests. So I think this is really key to using test and delivery to move faster. Because, of course, with this approach, there's a risk you can move a bit slower. Every time you have a winning test, you then go back and take on a delivery project to build a higher quality version of it. So you're spending a bit more time in delivery there. But that time is more than offset by the time savings you make by really controlling the scope of your test projects. Cool. So that's test and delivery. That's sort of what we've been doing at Threads to try and solve this problem. And hopefully that sounds like a good way of working to some of you. I'm sure some of you are already working in similar ways. But there might be some of you in the audience thinking, like, OK, yeah, this sounds good, but I'm not sure how I'm going to convince my team or my business more broadly that this is the way we should be trying to work. And I certainly had this experience at Thread. When we first started talking about test and delivery at Thread, we'd have debates around whether this was the right way for us to be working. And there were some quite common and sort of really understandable objections to the idea of working in this way. The first would most commonly come from kind of within the product team, which was a concern around just allowing any sort of reduction in quality to our live product, so a sort of discomfort with the idea of test projects, essentially. And there was a second concern that more commonly came from outside of the product team, from the rest of the business, which was the sense that maybe test and delivery is just going to mean we move a lot slower, because if we've got a winning test on our hands, why wouldn't we just ship it to our users immediately? Why do we need to then go back and invest in a delivery project to build something of higher quality that doesn't have this tech debt? Now, these concerns are really understandable, and addressing them, isn't easy. And I don't have a silver bullet at all. But I thought for the rest of my time, I'd just share some lessons that I took away from the process of kind of advocating for this way of working at Thread. So the first thing I found helpful was kind of picking recent projects we've been working on as a product team, and trying to develop a really sort of clear and consistent narrative around why we might have ended up with a suboptimal outcome from those projects. So maybe we've been dealing with slowed down by some tech debt that we'd introduced with an old test, or maybe, as in the registration project, we'd ended up just kind of wasting some time polishing a test that didn't end up winning anyway. And as soon as we started doing this and sort of talking about like the sort of real concrete benefits that test and delivery could bring to us, then we started the potential benefits of the approach became more tangible and sort of easier to understand. Second one is to write stuff down. So this seems really obvious, but I didn't realize this immediately in the process. But it started to occur to me that a lot of the discussions we were having around whether test and delivery would be a good thing for us to try really just relied, as is often the case, really just sort of relied on slightly misaligned interpretations of exactly what we were talking about. What exactly do we mean by test projects? What do we mean by delivery projects? What do we mean by an MVP? I think that's something no one really agrees on. And as soon as we started writing these things down in a document, where we wrote down these definitions and wrote down sort of how we envisaged using this process as a team, it then just became so much easier to have really productive discussions about whether we should try out this approach. Final takeaway for me was to treat it as an experiment. So this is something we do at Thread actually with any sort of process changes like this. We treat them as experiments. So whenever we're trying a new process, we'll set a date, a couple of weeks or months into the future where we say, okay, on this date, we're going to come back together as a team, and we're going to decide whether we want to continue working in this way or whether we want to revert to the old process. And this is great because it just really reduces the barrier to trying out some of these slightly more radical changes to your process, just because it feels like less of a leap in the dark, essentially, if you know you can come back and reject the process in the future. Cool, so that's it really. I think the key idea behind my talk today is really simple. Really I'm just advocating for, as product teams, we should just be really clear right from the outset whenever we're building something, whether we're building in order to learn or whether we're building in order to deliver a high-quality product experience for the long term. And as soon as we really sort of got this at Thread and started doing this at Thread, we were able to move, on the one hand, so much faster to validating our ideas and discovering the right products, but also, at the end of the day, to deliver higher quality products to our users, higher quality code into our code base and a higher quality UX to our users. Cool, so thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to taking questions.